Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director of the Atlantic Council's Energy Diplomacy Initiative, David Koranye. Saygıdeğer konuklarımız, şimdi sözü Atlantik Konseyi Enerji Diplomasisi İnisiyatifi Direktörü Sayın David Koranye'ye bırakıyorum.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that dynamic animation managed to wake you all up after the luncheon. And you're going to wake up from the food coma, and it's also going to be a little more disciplined and less unruly crowd than we had during the luncheon. It's my great privilege to welcome you to the first session in the afternoon on boosting regional energy partnerships and trade in the Eastern Mediterranean. This has been a panel or a topic that we have been consistently putting on the agenda for the past 5 years. And I had the privilege to moderate these panels since 2012, and we were back here in the Swiss hotel for the summit. And it's always quite well attended, as it is today, which I'm very happy about, which shows that there is just a lot of expectation surrounding Eastern Mediterranean natural gas resources. And I was happy to see in the last 18 months since the last summit in November 2015 that a lot of these expectations are finally turning into reality, I would argue. Since November 2015, we have seen commercial developments, major commercial developments in the Eastern Mediterranean basin. Just this February, we have seen the FID, the final investment decision, on the first phase of the Leviathan project, offshore Israel. In Egypt, ENI is proceeding quite expeditiously on the giant Zohr field, the exploitation of that field, and first gas may arrive as early as in 2019. We have seen new licensing rounds both in Israel and then in offshore Cyprus as well, which brought in some major players on the Cypriot side, such as Exxon and Qatar Petroleum entering the fray. We also gather here, I would argue, at a very interesting geopolitical time. In the last year or so, we have seen a Turkish-Israeli rapprochement unfolding, a very encouraging one. And indeed, the Atlantic Council had the privilege back in October to host, together with the World Energy Congress, Minister Steinitz from Israel. And it was the first ministerial visit after the 6.5-year hiatus in Turkey. So we were happy to provide a platform for that meeting and the discussions that took place in that setting. We have also seen some progress, although I would argue that progress remains tenuous in the context of the Cyprus settlement. Although we also see the potential of some conflagration around the gas explorations in the coming months, which could have the potential of derailing or at least hindering the Cyprus settlement negotiations. So we can only hope that cooler heads will prevail and the settlement negotiations will remain on track, and the natural gas resources, energy resources in the Eastern Mediterranean basin will continue to play a constructive incentive role in that context as well. So we are here to discuss all these commercial and geopolitical developments, and we have a terrific panel to do so. It's a great mix of government representatives, key private sector stakeholders, and of course experts. So let me go to some of the housekeeping that I'm tasked to do. This session is on the record. Please remember to silence your phone. Engage on Twitter by using the hashtag AC Summit. So let me turn to Shaul Meridor first, who is the Director General of the Ministry of National Infrastructures, Energy and Water Resources of the State of Israel. And of course, Israel is a key player, already a producing country in the region, exporting very soon, already actually exporting to Jordan, exporting larger quantities to Jordan very soon, and to and maybe through Egypt as well. So if you could just talk a bit about the export policy and export scenarios that you on the government side are pondering, and then if you could just specifically address the Turkish option going forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Israel discovered a lot of gas in the past years, and we had it took some time, but I think today we have a very coherent export policy of gas. At large, I can say that we are seeking for several routes for export of gas. We're talking about three main routes. One is the Turkish pipeline. I'll talk about it in a second. And the second one is the East Med pipeline, which is, of course, longer, costs much more money, and is in timeline a bit further than that. And there is the LNG in Egypt, which could be a path as well. These three paths that we follow are paths that will allow us as a country, first of all, to export our gas, but more over that, we can make a lot of progress in having our neighbors with us in cooperation in these aspects. Talking about the numbers for a second, I can say that Israel today has enough gas for export for at least two of the three routes that we're talking about, and we're now in the middle of a bid round that we pursue more gas to be found, and we believe that there is a lot more gas to be found than what was already found in Israel, meaning we'll have much more gas to export in the upcoming years. Talking about the Turkish pipeline in specific, as I said before, we don't see the path that I talked about competitive to each other, but more completing each other. And the Turkish pipeline, which could be the first one if we all in this panel rush, is, I think, a very viable export option for Israel. I think that from the reconciliation agreement that was about a year ago, we have a lot of progress, and a lot of progress still has to be made. But I'm pretty sure that if all sides are on the table and sitting and negotiating, we could have Israeli gas in Turkey in 3 to 4 years. This, of course, is for the Turkish domestic market, but more than that, it could be also relevant for the countries near Turkey, like Bulgaria, etc. The East Med pipeline that I talked about, and we had a very big summit by Minister Steinitz in Jerusalem, and followed with his co-ministers, the Minister of Greece, Cyprus, and Italy, and accompanied by the European Commission, is the second one. And it is a much more expensive pipeline. Technically, it's much more, let's call it challenging. And we think we have to pursue the FEED analysis in order to understand whether we can do it. We really believe that this is a very good potential. The last one, which is the LNG plants waiting the Delta Nile for gas, is of course the closest to Israel, almost as close as Turkey, but have a lot of geopolitics in it, and I won't get into too many details in this. So this, at large, is what we seek to achieve in the upcoming years.
Thank you, João. We would love to get into the weeds of the geopolitical details later on. I will call out on that for the future, but let me turn to Alparslan Bayraktar, who we have the great honor to join us today. He's the Deputy Undersecretary of the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources of Turkey. And if you could just put the East Med into the context of the overall Turkish energy strategy that your minister unrolled just a few weeks ago, and how does that stand up to the overall strategy, and then the role of gas within that overall strategy, and of course the imported gas.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everyone. To better understand the role of East Med gas into Turkish domestic market, I think it is better to, as you said rightly, to understand the overall energy policy. And pretty recently, a few weeks ago, our energy minister, Albayrak, introduced the new energy policy dimensions to the energy community and Turkish people. And when you look at this energy policy, there are three main pillars shaped this energy policy. One thing is obviously security of supply, because if you don't have adequate plans, there's an obvious risk in supply security. And the second pillar is the localization. And the third pillar is predictable and foreseeable market structure, energy markets. So these are the three main pillars. And if you look at these energy policy objectives, basically we are aiming to address two major challenges that we are facing. One, obviously the meeting growing demand. Turkey, according to IEA, is going to see the fastest growing demand in energy among IEA member countries in the medium and long run. So you have to meet this growing demand. This is one thing. And the second is the challenge of the market, and the energy policy is trying to address this challenge, is obviously reliance on the imported resources. Unfortunately, in terms of primary energy sources, we are almost 70% of the primary energy sources we are importing. And that's one of the main reasons that current account deficit is happening. So you have to address these two challenges with these policy framework. And to be able to do that, we are planning to use some tools. One is utilizing our domestic resources, mainly coal and renewable. We would like to improve our energy infrastructures. We would like to make investment heavily on our power grid and gas network as well. We have to make our power grid more resilient and more flexible operation available. In terms of gas infrastructures, we would like to heavily invest on the gas infrastructures, both FSRUs, LNGs, and mainly underground storage facility to make gas available from one point to another and with the least cost manner. These are the infrastructure side of investment and tools. We would like to add nuclear power into our energy mix and continue to our market reforms. Turkey had great achievement over the last decade to transform its electricity market more market-based structures. And one last thing, as a tool to diversifying our energy sources, countries and routes. And in that sense, EastMed gas would be a great option to address also these challenges. So to understand this general framework and the general needs of the markets and also global developments is quite important to position EastMed gas into this picture. And in that sense, diversifying supply routes and countries, as I said earlier, it's quite important to create competitive gas market and to address security of supply, because security of supply is not and only our issue, it's not a national issue. It is much more a regional issue or global issue, and it needs to be addressed in a regional or global settings. And we would like to have a long-term energy cooperation, and the major thing to be able to reach that long-term energy cooperation, obviously, to strike balance between producer countries, consumers, and transporter countries. So these are the general approach, the vision for gas market. When it comes to specifically project like EastMed or any new project, again, we introduced during as you mentioned about during our first meeting, ministerial meeting with Israel and Turkey during the World Energy Congress, our minister said, we approached the project with three main principles. One is obviously it should be mutually beneficial. Both sides should win. And the second thing is it should address Turkey's security of supply concern, also for Europe's security of supply. And the third thing, if the project contribute solving regional conflicts or bring peace, prosperity, and stability to the region, we are open to discuss. And that's why last couple of months we are discussing with my colleagues about potential import from Israel to Turkey, and maybe through Turkey to Europe.
Thank you. Let me bring in the private sector and turn to both Yossi Abu, who is the CEO of Delek Drilling, and Keith Elliott, who is with Noble, two major players on the Israeli side and on the Cypriot side as well. So how do these export options look from a private sector perspective, and how do you see the commercial and geopolitical preconditions? What are the preconditions they have to be aligned in order to make these fairly sizable investments into these upstream developments and, of course, the midstream segments as well? So Yossi, let me start with you.
So thank you. I think that as Shaul and Al-Paslan say, in the end we are seeing this project as a very viable project. But like any other mega upstream project.
Sorry, can you just put a very...
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Like any other mega upstream project, you need to see in this project a certainty that will allow to build the upstream segment, which will be billions of dollars of project, and the midstream segment, which is the pipeline to Turkey. And that will be, in order to do that, we'll need to see a certainty of demand in the Turkish market and behind and other market in the region. And obviously we need to see all the other aspects. I think that we are quite aligned, the private sector and the government, is the fact that technically we don't see any showstoppers. So if everything, like if we are sitting on the commercial side and getting to an agreement on the commercial side that the base of that agreement will set a win-win basic for both sides for a long-term basis, and that should be the foundation of the project, we can flow gas to Turkey 2020, 2021 in a significant amount, so close to a 1 BCF a day. And this is something that I think it's very important, because now it's basically in our hands, like more or less this panel, right? And this is provide to us a lot of, I would say, comfort, because we are seeing a very constructive discussion in the last couple of months. It's not that we don't have challenge, but it's the usual stuff. And we are seeing constructive discussion. We are seeing people working to see how they mitigate the risk of each other. And basically, we are very, very...
Into that is the commercial transaction. Particularly if you look at our industry today, I come from a company where we have two fundamental areas of expertise and two fundamental areas of focus. One's on large-scale, unconventional resource development, primarily in North America, and the other's on global exploration and deep water development. And so, like many companies, have that competition for capital, and the projects have to compete. Again, as you've seen in the recent sanction of the Leviathan project, these are very competitive projects provided there's infrastructure in place at a reasonable cost. And the third piece is in the geopolitical aspect. There has to be an ability to move gas across borders in the region for these projects to really realize their sort of full opportunity. I think to your question about pipeline exports to Turkey, pipeline exports to Europe, it really comes down to that fundamental economic calculus. These are, generally speaking, very prolific reservoirs. They're very large-scale resources, and so that bit works. The bit that has to work is, in conjunction with that, is a netback price to the operators that actually warrants the risk capital deployment to make these investments, particularly if you're investing in multi-billion-dollar pipelines. And there has to be fiscal stability and certainty that in projects of a 30 to 40-year project life, we can count on a level of fiscal stability that allows us to realize the returns on those investments. Those things are beginning to fall in place, I think, here in the region.
Makes tremendous sense. Brenda, let me turn to you. You have written extensively on EastMed energy resources in the last couple of years. Where do you see the bottlenecks, and what do you see as the most viable export routes going forward?
Right. Well, first thing, it's great to be in Istanbul, and it's great that it's not even special that there's 3 Israelis on a panel in Istanbul. I think that's a great sign of the time, and want to thank the Atlantic Council and the people of Turkey for this fact that we're in this historical stage. I think the bottlenecks, at the end of the day, they're not geopolitical. They're not political. In the end of the day, it would be commerciality, just demand. While Turkey is a very vibrant gas market, I think it actually is a well-diversified market, and it has, currently 4 supply projects, a 5th one on the way, potentially a 6th one on the way. So of course, it will be, in the end of the day, just the commerciality and the demand. I think there is a lot of opportunity for combining some of Turkey's projects, for instance, for whether it's directly linking or swapping for Eastern Mediterranean resources to be linked to TANAP, to the Southern Gas Corridor, and reach markets in Europe, even if physically those molecules stay in Turkey. I think also Eastern Mediterranean, Israeli and Cypriot gas, especially Israeli gas, could also help develop infrastructure in southeast Turkey, again linking to what you were saying about in terms of better linkage of the grid within Turkey itself. So I think more resources reaching this part of Turkey actually would eliminate some of Turkey's internal bottlenecks in its own grid. What I would say that maybe one thing which is not necessary, that one bottleneck we shouldn't create is maybe to keep the commercial tracks and the political tracks between Israel and Turkey actually separate. Because I think the relations between Israel and Turkey stand on bedrock that is much stronger than gas. And we should make sure that those important relations, which are important for the security of both countries, which are important for the the foreign policy and national security policies of both countries, we should make sure that commercial potential disputes or disagreements don't spill over to the political, and vice versa. Still, the commercial track is going to have to stand on its own, even if we have a strong political track.
Thank you, Brenda. You mentioned how great it is to have Israelis on the panel, and I cannot agree more. I would add to that hopefully next year we will have some Greek and Turkish Cypriots of a unified island sitting on that panel as well, participating in this conversation. With that, let me turn to Ambassador Payet and ask him to give us a perspective from U.S. government point of view and also from an Athens point of view. So how does the Eastern Mediterranean and these resource development and export scenarios look from Athens?
Great. Well, first of all, David, let me say what a pleasure it is for me to be here. Thank you to the Atlantic Council. I've heard great things about this conference, and there were a couple of times when I was hoping to come from Kyiv, but events got in the way, so it's fantastic to finally be here. I'll start with the U.S. interest, which is strongly focused on supporting energy security and diversification in Europe. And if there is one thing that I learned through my 3 years in Ukraine, it is that there is no surer way to advance the U.S. goal of a Europe whole, free, and at peace than locking in progress on energy diversification. From that perspective, I think one of the things that's most interested me since my arrival in Athens about a half year ago is the centrality of energy security in Greece's own foreign policy vision. And you can see that in statements from the foreign minister and strategic thinkers in Athens, but also in terms of concrete progress that is happening. There is a real potential for Greece to emerge as a significant European energy hub if the opportunities that are present now can be locked in. This would be an important driver of investment going forward and would help to answer the question that Greeks are asking, which is what drives their economy going forward as they begin to come out of this 7-year crisis period and lay the foundation for sustainable growth. From that perspective, there's a lot more going on in Greece than I think a lot of people appreciate. The signature example, of course, is TAP. It's important to recognize that project, as my friend and former colleague Amos Hochstein liked to point out, the first new energy infrastructure built anywhere in Europe specifically to carry non-Russian gas. TAP is 20% complete in Greece now. 20% of the pipe is already laid. It's been very impressive to me to see how strong the political support for that project is across the government, especially when I travel in northern Greece. Everybody's focused on the job creation that TAP represents and the potentiality to do even more. But that's not the whole story. There are also significant developments with the government's push to develop this north-south corridor. It's quite significant that when Prime Minister Tsipras traveled to Kyiv this winter, he and President Poroshenko talked specifically about the idea of using Greece as the landing point for LNG getting as far as Ukraine. which would have the effect of locking in the progress that has been achieved in Ukraine in terms of energy diversification using reverse flow through Europe. Greece already has excess or unused capacity at its Revithousa plant, the gasification facility, but there is also an ambitious proposal for Alexandroupoli, both of which the United States supports as part of this broader goal of advancing diversification. And then the other piece, and I was especially interested to hear Keith's point about the commercial ripeness of some of these Eastern Mediterranean plays, because one thing that's very interesting to me is the overlay between these potential commercial arrangements in the Eastern Mediterranean and the already existing strategic cooperation. So 3 weeks ago, I was in the Peloponnese as Israeli, Greek, and American Air Force officers exercised together, along with some other partners. So you're building, and that's just one example of what is a thriving Greek-Israeli bilateral relationship. And you're building on solid ground as you begin to develop this commercial potentiality, and all of which would have the effect, to finish where I started, of advancing the U.S. strategic objective, which is to continue to support energy diversification across Europe.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me turn back to Deputy Undersecretary Bayraktar for a moment and push you a bit on the Turkish gas demand side of things. So a couple of years ago, sort of the conventional wisdom was that Turkish gas demand is going to skyrocket and go all the way up to 80 BCM or so. And then ever since, partly because of policies put in place and emphasizing domestic indigenous resources and helping coal with feed-in tariffs and also pushing renewables forward, what you see is in the power generation sector, the gas use actually declined quite heavily. So how do you see the space for growth as far as gas demand is concerned in the power sector, but also in the industrial and the residential sector? And then to what extent you see actual space for East Med gas vis-a-vis if you look at, at other supplies coming from Azerbaijan or Iraqi Kurdistan or other sources. So how do you see that equation shaping up?
Well, when you look at the demand side of the gas, I think it was 3 years ago, I gave an interview to Interfax agency, and they asked me a question about whether Turkey is going to see the demand in 2030, 81 BCM. There were so many expectations about the gas demand in Turkey is going to increase very significantly. But when you look at and I said as an answer, I replied and I said, it depends on the competitiveness of the gas prices. Because what we are witnessing here in Turkey today in power market, we see excess supply. We see a lot of renewables coming into play. Coal is playing some role. And when you look at the generating power from different sources in an excess amount of electricity, the market prices are low. And when you have like an expensive gas putting in place to the generating power from CCGT power plants, you cannot compete with the different sources in the market. So it depends on how competitive will be the gas prices. And another aspect is obviously we are considering also using energy efficiency and other measures to reduce somehow our demand. That's our general policy. But again, the important thing is the energy demand, gas demand is very much linked to the competitiveness of the gas prices. But in that picture, where the East Med gas stands for, we are at the very critical stage in Turkey right now. Because what we witnessed last decade, the transformation of the electricity sector, is going to happen in gas market as well. I told this to my colleagues from the Ministry of Energy and also the private companies that when you look at Turkish gas contracts, we are at the time of renegotiating and repositioning Turkey in those contracts, both with Russian contracts, Iranian contracts, and Azeri first contracts. So there are rooms in the market. So new gas for the new gas. It's not only meeting demand, meeting growing demand. Demand is even like not growing so fast. Still, because of the contract structures, we are expecting new gas can play a role. East Med gas would be one example. Also, you said like Iraqi gas would be an option for Turkey. So there are rooms in the market. But again, it depends on the pricing and competitiveness of the market. And we should understand one thing, that the global gas environment is changing. Now we are discussing more like a flexibility in all aspects. With the contracts, instead of long-term contracts, we are seeing more like a short-term, instead of like a old-style, old-fashioned oil indexation pricing. We see more like a hub pricing and other alternatives. So these are the changes happening globally, and we should understand this, all sides understand this, and understand the market dynamics and needs, and then we should find, I believe, a common ground to address the market needs.
Great. So I think I can anticipate the answer, but let me turn to Yossi and Keith about the competitiveness of these resources. How confident you are that you will be able to effectively compete on the Turkish market? These are deep offshore resources, and if you look at some onshore alternatives, then you could argue that the competitiveness might be questionable. But how confident are you that you will be able to compete in the Turkish market?
I think that we are very confident in our ability to compete. But I want to go back to one of the points that was mentioned here, and that was like the new policy, the energy policy that the government basically put in place. And there's few pillars to that policy, but one of them was certainty, stability of supply, diversification, etc. So obviously, I think between the alternative, so from diversification, definitely the new one, so that it's provide us or provide the Turkish government this diversification that they target. But there's another point. Another point is reliability of supply and stability of supply. We are sole supplier to the Israeli market for more than a decade. And when I'm saying that, I'll take Tamar as an example. So Tamar is a sole supplier to the Israeli market. In the last 4 years, we have 200 minutes in total of a downtime, which is unheard of in our industry. So when you are looking on as a market, as a government in the end, when you are looking on the overall package, the easiest thing is always to come and say it's have to be competitive. And usually governments take decisions only when they have to, right? Only when there's a crisis. I think that the package that we are bringing here to the table is not only the competitive that we can be to the market, but it's also stability, reliability, and diversification of supply. And I truly believe that we can bring that into the market.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with Yossi. I believe that the projects that we are developing and have developed in the Eastern Mediterranean are well positioned to compete as described not only in Turkey, but I would also say on a global scale. So one of the things I think you see that's unique to this region, and particularly in the southeastern Mediterranean countries, is a fundamental undersupply of gas. And so when we look at the markets that we compete into, frankly, our biggest competitor is imported LNG. So when we look at the markets in Egypt, we look at the markets in Jordan, that's what we compete against. And we compete very, very favorably with that. I think, and not only that, we also compete very favorably when you look at the underutilized LNG infrastructure in Egypt. We compete very favorably on a global scale for a cost of supply of LNG. I think when you get into large-scale pipeline projects of the scale like required to move gas to Turkey or to move gas to Greece and beyond to Italy, then you really need two things. You need big partnerships in the capital outlays of those pipelines, and you also need very significant quantities of gas to be able to move into those markets to essentially amortize the cost of the pipe. And so I think we're well positioned to compete. Further discoveries in the basin will enhance that position to compete. But there actually are multiple independent types of markets in this basin that we're competing into. Turkey is one type market. The others are those ones where we compete against imported LNG.
Let me drill down a little bit on Egypt, because that's one of the wild cards in my mind. So you have an already big gas market in Egypt. It's a dynamically growing gas market, a fast-growing energy demand in Egypt. But you also have production potential that is coming online with Zohr and potentially additional fields. It's a little unclear how the saldo will look like. So is Egypt going to resume gas exports in the early 2020s, or you see that because of the failure of subsidy reform, because of the increased demand, you will still need to actually export gas to Egypt, and then that also will have repercussions to the LNG terminals in the sense that they will remain idle, so you can use them to re-export gas from the Eastern Mediterranean. So what's the thinking around that equation?
So our view is that, first of all, Egypt has made a fantastic turnaround in its incentivization of exploration and development. And you see that bearing fruit with the Zohr project that ENI is moving forward with some of the investments that have been announced by BP and others recently in Egypt. Those are all really, I think, great examples of when government chooses to incentivize and encourage industry. I think to the question of the Egyptian market, our view is that while Zohr is a fantastic discovery, and clearly there are other large-scale developments underway, that market will continue to be undersatisfied, and there will continue to be a deficit in the market. Certainly the gap will close some, I think, and that's just purely domestic demand. We see the LNG export terminal opportunities as being over and above that. I think the thing you have to think about when you think of Egypt is think about a population of 95 million people that's growing at somewhere around 2.5% a year, and currently has a per capita electricity consumption of something about 1/4 the per capita consumption of France, or less than Iraq. And that gives you a sense of the scale of the development and growth opportunity. And I'd say not only opportunity, but the actual need. That for economic development, that energy demand has to rise.
Any dissenting views on that from the panel?
No, I think that one thing that should be mentioned about Egypt right now is the fact that the demand is capped by a supply, right? Because Egypt right now is with a roughly 4 BCF a day of supply from Egyptian discoveries, and the gap is basically being imported. Now that is not enough in the current demand. So there's a lot of projects that will go forward if they will have a stable source of gas, and probably we are seeing right now almost 8,000 megawatt of new power plants that will kick into the system in the next 1 or 2 years. This is along almost 10 BCM a year. So there's a huge demand there that it's basically waiting to see a stable source of gas. Most of it may arrive from the local discoveries, but that should, I think, get some enhancement from additional imported gas.
Can I add something? This reminds me the very important dimension of this gas equation, which is time factor and time dimension. If we miss the temporal dimension, for instance, like a before Zohr exploration or before Zohr, it was a different ball game, and now it's changing. And all these, that's why I try to emphasize one thing, that the global dynamics of the gas, abundant gas, availability of gas, and competitive prices are affecting the whole picture. In that sense, we shouldn't miss the opportunity, and we should consider significantly about the time factor in here. And the rest of the developments, new developments, definitely will affect the future picture of the East Med and in regional gas market.
Brenda?
I think on the supply ledger, something we should be watching. On one hand, there will probably be new discoveries, especially in Egypt. It seems very ripe for new discoveries there. But also on the supply side, we should be watching for perhaps a negative in North Africa, which is a very, third biggest supply into Europe itself, because as we see sort of the resolution or intensification of military activities against ISIS fighters in Syria and Iraq, and many of those being dislodged, most obviously to North Africa, which is sort of the next sort of soft underbelly in the region. We might see more of a buildup of these fighters in Libya, and this could affect, for instance, attacks on Algeria, which we know have already been successful in their targets of the energy infrastructure there. So I think that while we will see a lot of new positives on the supply side, we might also see some important suppliers having difficulty meeting demand, existing supplies into Europe.
This is a question for Ambassador Payet, but also to the whole panel. And this is obviously for a later stage because the quantities do not justify this right now. But there was a lot of talk lately about that pipeline from offshore Israel through Cyprus, collecting some Cypriot resources as well, on the way to Crete, and then onwards to Greece and onwards to the European market, feeding it into TAP or other pipelines. How real is that, you think, from a political and also from a commercial perspective? This is for the panel.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a question for Keith and the other market players. But what I will say as the diplomat on this panel is that it's relatively rare in my business where you have an issue that is truly win-win. Usually somebody feels like they're getting a shorter end of the stick. What's fascinating to me about these regional issues, and the point about timeliness is also relevant, this is a set of issues that is genuinely win-win for all of the regional players, whether Israel, Turkey, Cyprus, Greece, or the entire European Union, which is what gives me some hope that despite the considerable cost obstacles to some of these more ambitious projects, there's actually a good chance that some of them will come to fruition. And again, I would come back to emphasize how important it is that TAP, which went through a very long gestation period, is now real, is going to be completed, and will carry gas to Europe. And I think that it's in that spirit that we need to approach some of these more ambitious proposals.
See, Keith?
Yeah, I guess my perspective on it would be, while the pipes are expensive, as we've all recognized, the other piece of the equation is what's the quantity of gas available to put through those lines. And to that end, I would just remind that we're actually, I think, in very early days of the Levant Basin. We in Delek opened the basin only really 15 years ago with discoveries offshore Israel. And if you think about what's happened over the past few years, it's actually the emergence of a fairly classic early entry hydrocarbon basin. We went into Israel, we found the easiest things first, the things that are easy to image on seismic. The next most difficult things were the things that were subsalt imaging required, and then it was the Tamar and Leviathan and Karish and Tanin and the other 40 TCF of discoveries that we've had. And then when you look at the like of Zohr is another level of complexity, but a completely different play type. And so really you've got a handful of discoveries of 3 different play types, and there'll be others to test. And so I think one of the things to keep in mind is this basin is very much in its early days, and I wouldn't call it infancy, but adolescence at least.
Was it first? Sorry.
No, please. First, I think that I totally agree with the timing comment here by El Paslan. And actually building on Keith also. So in the end, we believe that there's much more gas to be found in the region, right, in the Levant Basin. And our belief is that what we are seeing right now is like phases of development. So the first phase of the immediate phase for regional development is pipeline to Turkey, is pipeline to Egypt. But if you want people to come and explore and to come and try discover more and more gas, so I think that Israel government doing the right thing. They are trying to develop alternatives to monetize the gas. And as Shaul said, it's early days of that pipeline, right? And it's different timetable. So they need to understand, we need to understand what is the feed result, what is the cost, etc., and also contributions by the European Union, etc. So then we can really assess how much is, if it's commercial at all, and the feasibility of that. But it's the right thing to try and open an alternative to monetize additional gas.
I just want to add 2 things to this discussion. One is the crave of Europe for diversification. Europe understands it's a condition in the gas sector. It has a 300 BCM annual demand. It has a depletion of the North Sea, and as Brenda said, some North Africa sources are being on risk, and what they see is their need to diversify and their needs of gas, which are not, in looking for 5 to 10 years from now, are not met. And from that perspective, the East Med pipeline gives Europe something that others don't. It gives Europe a direct connection to the gas source. And this is something that today Europe doesn't have. And I think for that matter, it really interests the Europeans. And believe me, they don't do it because they want to help Israel. They do it because, first of all, they want to help Europe. And in that perspective, I think we have a very fruitful discussion. And I want to comment to the ambassador's things. You rarely see 4 countries, and in late or the beginning of this month, we had a summit in Israel with all ministers of energy from Italy, Greece, Cyprus, and the European Commissioner of Energy. This is not something that happens because people like coming to Tel Aviv, although I have to say, please come. It's a wonderful city. But they come because they understand there is a big potential. It's not for tomorrow, it's for 8 years from today. But it is a potential that has to be explored by us and by them together.
Can I challenge you a little bit?
Of course.
Because I attended a conference, thanks for the invitation, 3 weeks ago in Israel, and it was so fun to listen to the panel. There were just 4 people on the panel, but 5 different opinions and shouting and.
It's 2 Jews. That's what it means. Yeah.
So my point, I agree most of the comments, but I agree with Brenda what she said at the beginning, and it's I think true regardless of the projects or the routes. But my point is I think commerciality, the commercial terms are the key driver for all projects, and we are witnessing this in Europe as well. European Union is complaining and they're trying to diversify their supply routes and countries, and mainly countries. But at the end of the day, if you look at the numbers, 2016, the import of Russian gas is increasing in Europe. So yes, in terms of policy settings, it's there, but at the end of the day, commercial conditions are playing the key driver here.
Great. A final question, maybe before I turn to the audience, and there is tremendous expertise in the room, so please prepare to be called upon if there are no spontaneous questions, although I doubt that, is to Mr. Meridor on the Israeli side of the gas demand. So you guys created gas demand, quite a substantial gas demand out of nothing in pretty much less than a decade, and there is still more room to grow as far as I understand. There is still the transportation sector, households, etc. So how do you see that unfolding from an Israeli domestic demand perspective?
Well, we have a 10 BCM annual demand today, and it is, you talked before on quick wins, so these were the quick wins. We have almost 60% of electricity already on natural gas. We do have to do much more in the transportation sector and in the commercial sector and industry. We're now put a lot of money in our budget to put incentives in place for the both commercial and industry going to natural gas. We intend to move all heavy trucks and buses to either natural gas or electricity. And of course, as we see the transportation sector advance, globally, in Israel, every car that is electrical is 60% gas. And Minister Steinitz decided a year ago to reduce coal from, I think a decade ago, we were about 60%. Today, we will be at about 35. And I think in 5 to 10 years, we're going to drop to about 20. It's a major step for Israel to move to natural gas. We believe it's better for the economy, for the environment, and of course for Israel as a country with a lot of natural gas. There are a lot of steps to be done. We started doing that, but if you look at the Israeli perspective, we first had to put the framework in place, the gas framework, that these guys could start working. Now we advanced to enhancing demand, and we opened the sea for further exploration that we hope next year will start and bring more gas to the play, and then enhance more demand and, of course, export.
I think that there's one, maybe on the demand side, there's a thing that we can take an example from Turkey, which is a very good example of introducing gas into housing, so directly into houses. And currently, we are close to zero in Israel, and I think Turkey, it's more than 1/3 for sure, or roughly 1/3. So this is a good example that if we will be able to introduce gas into housing, that another layer of demand. The government start to work on that. This will take time, but this is definitely almost solely a governmental decision, like policy.
I would just say that in terms of the role of natural gas in various fuel mixes in industrial countries, I think in the last decade or so, we've been so fixated on climate and maybe renewables that we forgot about air pollution. So we have sort of an extraordinary situation in Europe where you have rising use of renewables with rising use of coal. Where obviously, if you look even at the American example, where zero policy, more or less, on renewables and climate brought to a huge reduction, not only transfers from coal to natural gas, but a huge reduction in air pollution and of course of climate emissions, inadvertently. So I think it's really important in this era where maybe there's a question about the U.S. role in climate in general, what would be the meaning for the international frameworks, that even if some of our countries are maybe less diligent about climate, that we don't forget the air pollution aspects of coal in Israel and Turkey and beyond. And in Europe, that teaches us about climate, but in the end has a rising coal consumption.
Yeah, although I feel obliged as a European to point out that that's all true, but if you look at the per capita emissions in Europe versus the United States, you still have less than half. So the major cuts in emissions were
GNP
done
is
in
what
the
counts,
1990s.
not per capita.
So this is a temporary spike in coal consumption, and the major cuts were done back in the 1990s already. So the absolute comparison shows a very different picture, but the relative one in the last couple of years is true. Anyway, sorry about that, please.
Although yesterday I told Shaul I'm not going to give you a hard time tomorrow, but just a little bit question came to my mind that the transformation in Israel power market from coal to gas, I don't know how much is the price of producing electricity from coal today in Israel, but I assume it's cheaper than gas. And can we expect like lower prices in terms of after the transformation from coal to gas and power generation comes from gas, it will be expensive with current prices. So can we expect like a lower gas prices in the future to just not to increase the prices of electricity in Israel?
I'll have two comments on that. First of all, economically, coal is much more expensive than gas because it has a lot of bad influences, and one of them is what Brenda said. When we produce electricity in coal, we have a lot of air pollution that, of course, makes bigger spending on health. But other than that, yes, we can expect lower prices in the future. That's what the framework is partially about. Not only getting the actors in Israel starting to work, but also to get in more companies in. One of them is the Greek company Energean, which bought Karish of Noble and Delek, and part of them will come from the bid round and start competition in Israel. Not only, and we appreciate what Noble and Delek did in Israel for the last 15 years, but I think all of us in the panel agrees that the best way is competition, and that's what we are trying to achieve in Israel. It's an infrastructure sector, so it'll take time. It's not tomorrow, but we do want to see competition in that sense.
I think that one of the advantage in Israel from that perspective is that most of the new power plant, gas power plant, are new. So they are very efficient. We're talking about 57, 60% efficiency. And if you avoid, for example, the externalities of, environmental, etc., from coal, the gas is still very, very competitive vis-a-vis the coal because of that efficiency, vis-a-vis the efficiency of the coal.
Keith?
Yeah, I just would, to the question about impact of gas versus alternative fuels, if you look at IEC's, Israel Electric Corporation's published reports over the past few years, since Tamar came on production in 2013, IEC are reflecting a $1 billion per year fuel cost savings over what they were spending prior to the advent of that facility. At the same time, Tamar has reduced CO2 emissions in Israel in the last 3 years by 30 million metric tons. So it isn't a win-lose relationship. This is truly a win-win opportunity.
Great, so we have about 15 minutes left. I was beginning to feel a little guilty because I think this is turning into a love fest, maybe with the exception of this last exchange. So feel free to ask a little bit more provocative questions. And again, there is tremendous expertise in the room. So, sir, please. And if you could identify yourself briefly, that'd be fantastic.
Gürkan Kumbaroğlu, Boğaziçi University. Very nice panel. I especially like the important emphasis on the economics. And I would like to ask about the joint declaration on April 3 that 5 energy ministers undersigned. Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Italy, and the European Commission for the world's longest pipeline going directly to Greece and Italy and the deepest. To me, this has no economic feasibility, so and is rather an act of solidarity. But I wonder how particularly this looks for Yossi Abu and Sean Meridor.
Let's collect a couple of questions and then go back to the panel, please. Wait for the microphone. It's coming.
Thank you very much. Selin Nasi, Hürriyet Daily News. My question is for the Deputy Undersecretary Meridor, Mr. Meridor. Back in December 2016, during an interview, you stated that Israel and Turkey have been working on a framework for the export of Israeli gas to Turkey that would protect business contracts from political disputes. And today, you also stated that a deal is possible within a couple of months. So what kind of a solution have you come up with?
Just collect one more question, Charles. I think think you are going to the wrong direction.
don't
He's
you
over
raise-
here in the
yeah,
middle.
raise.
Over there.
Charles Elinas, Atlantic Council. I start from what Undersecretary Bayraktar said, that prices are key. So right now in the world there is plenty of gas, lots of gas everywhere, and LNG. And we heard earlier on today also that, and I know that, the United States shale oil and now gas are coming back very strongly and are acting as a cap on global oil and gas prices. In that context, how are long-term low prices, for example on gas, less than $6 per million BTU in Europe and Turkey, how would these affect the export of East Med gas?
So I believe the first question was mostly covered, but if somebody feels they have something to add to the issue of the pipeline all the way to Greece, feel free, maybe Yossi or Brenda.
I can just say that we had a pre-FEED analysis that was done by a company, and a European company, a subsidiary to Edison, that does state viable economically and possible technically. So I think, again, it has to be looked at, it has to be confirmed, but we don't believe in pipelines that are not economical. If there won't be business to business there won't be pipelines. In that perspective, I don't think it's a solidarity issue. I think it's a strictly commercially viable issue, and if it will be commercially viable, it will be there. If not, then it won't.
I believe the second question was straight to
For
you,
me.
so please.
Well, I won't get into the negotiations, although most of us are here. I'll just say that I'm pretty sure that if we will strike a deal, we can make everything we need to put in place. I think that's the other things. You can get into our room and see everything that happens.
And the Love Fest continues, that's great. And then on pricing and competitiveness?
It's for you.
Is it for me?
I think so.
Again?
I believe the question, Charles' question was about the long-term gas demand and pricing trajectories. So how do you see that shaping up, both from a producer and a consumer perspective?
Well, I think I said a lot about this, but let me briefly once again emphasize one thing, that one of the main pillars that our energy strategy is to make investment heavily on infrastructures, basically underground storage facility, FSRUs, and LNG capacity, increasing LNG capacities. Basically, we see that the LNG is going to play a very crucial role in globally and also for Turkish market, and we need to prepare our infrastructures to get this cheap and abundant and available gas in the flexibility and also the pricing perspective. But again, we are lucky enough to have, for instance, we have two pipelines coming from West Balkan pipeline passing through 4 countries coming from Russia. 2 pipeline is going to be built for Turk Stream, 1 pipeline already operational, Blue Stream. These 5 pipelines plus 2 pipelines from Azerbaijan, 1 pipeline from Iran, potential gas from Iraq or Israel. So there are a lot of pipelines options for Turkey as well. But we are not, we are also considering to have LNG, and it will have a role in our gas market in the future.
Anybody else? So let's collect another round of questions. We still have time for 2 or 3.
He's on the way.
Oh, please. Carola.
Carol Nachli from Crystal Energy in the UK. David, you said Egypt is a wild card, but actually I see a country which surprisingly was not mentioned in the discussion as a wild card, that is Lebanon. So I'd like to hear the panelists' views on the Lebanese government decision to include some blocks in its forthcoming licensing round which fall in the disputed area with Israel.
Any other questions? Well,
Well, I think the minister attended this question when we were in, I think it was Houston 2 months ago. There is a disputed area between Lebanon and Israel in the north. Israel will do whatever it needs to defend its rights. I think on that area, better not said than said, and we'll do whatever we need to do with our US friends and others in the world, including the UN, to see that everything is aligned with the international law.
So unless there are any other questions, we will close this down early. The panelists showed some extreme discipline as far as their answers were concerned. Exemplary Eastern Mediterranean efficiency in their answers. So the next session, just some housekeeping again, the next session begins at 4:15. We have two parallel sessions. The first one, diversifying European gas supply. So in many ways, a continuation of this conversation with a wider geographic scope that will be led by Ambassador Morningstar, the head of our Global Energy Center. And then the second session is on developing Africa, investment strategies, challenges and opportunities. And that one is going to be in Geneva. The first one, the diversifying European gas supplies, will be in the adjacent room, which is Fuji 1. Reminders again, wear your credentials all the time. And for the latest agenda, please download and refresh the app on a regular basis. Thanks again for the panel. Thanks again for the audience. Great questions. Let's give them a round of applause.